So why is it so difficult to get over someone when there's no closure? Closure is not just a conversation. It's a psychological completion of a story. So when a relationship ends abruptly or ambiguously, without explanation, resolution, or honesty, the mind refuses to file the experience away as over. And instead, it keeps circling, searching for answers that never actually come. And that creates a particular kind of heartbreak, which is the grief of unfinished emotional business. You see, the human mind is wired to seek meaning, and when there's unanswered questions, it can keep the mind stuck. Because we crave coherence, and we want events, especially emotional events, to make sense. But when someone leaves without clarity, you can't help but wonder, why did they pull away? Did you do something wrong? Was any of it real? Were they hiding something? Can it be fixed? Do they miss me? It's like your mind becomes a detective with no evidence and no suspect. Just a looping investigation. And without answers, the brain treats the relationship as still active. It's still pending, unresolved. And that's why you keep replaying scenes, reading old texts, analyzing moments. It's not that you're obsessed, you're trying to finish a story that was never allowed to end. And it's important to realize that emotional bonds don't break just because the relationship does. And that's because feelings are not like switches. They're habits embedded in the nervous system. So when you're attached to someone, your body integrates them into your emotional rhythm. Like, your dopamine activates when they text. Your oxytocin rises when you're close to them. Your cortisol drops when you feel connected to them. When you think about your future, that includes them. But when the relationship ends suddenly or without explanation, your body doesn't understand what happened. There's no transition, no gradual detaching, no clear psychological endpoint. It's like slamming on the brakes at full speed, and the emotional inertia keeps pushing you forward, even though the relationship's already behind you. And without closure, your brain, holds on to the hope of potential repair. And that's what ambiguity does. It creates hope. And where there's hope makes the whole letting go process more difficult. Because if the ending wasn't clear, the mind begins to generate possible scenarios like maybe they'll reach out, maybe they're confused, maybe they regret it, maybe this isn't final, maybe I misunderstood something. When you have hope, that feeling of hope can feel like a warm, fuzzy, comforting feeling, but it also keeps the wound open. So ambiguous endings keep your emotional state in that suspended state, living in the painful maybe. And you grieve not just the person, but the version of yourself that existed with them. Because when someone leaves without closure, you don't just lose them. You lose the future you imagined, the identity that you held with them, the story you thought you were building, and the version of yourself that felt loved and chosen. And all that creates existential grief, like, who am I now that this version of my life is gone? It's not just heartbreak, it's identity disruption. And the lack of closure, it forces you to carry the emotional weight alone. Because when the other person refuses to talk, explain, or engage, they leave you holding the confusion, the responsibility, the guilt, the questions, the emotional chaos. It becomes all like a one-sided burden. And your nervous system tries to resolve something that it can only be resolved with mutual honesty. And that leaves you emotionally exhausted because you're doing the work of two people. And your nervous system, it wants safety because uncertainty feels like danger. And that sudden, unexplained emotional loss triggers the primal brain, activating things like hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, anxiety, longing, obsessive loops. It's not that your brain's trying to torture you, it's trying to keep you safe. So it keeps asking, what happened? How do I prevent this from happening again? So the survival function becomes heartbreak in disguise. And if the relationship had toxic elements to it, the lack of closure can be part of the trauma bond. And in particular, people with narcissistic traits, they end relationships or connections in ways that deny closure, like sudden withdrawal, silent treatment, coldness, loss of warmth, emotional vanishing. All that destabilizes you and deepens that emotional dependence. So the pain you feel isn't just loss, it's the shock of emotional whiplash. Because your brain's trying to reconcile the person you once showed affection, who once showed you affection, with the one you suddenly saw become distant. And that contradiction is addictive and tormenting, basically the hallmark of trauma bond. So then there's a question, which is, what's the path out of that? And the path is, well, you have to create your own closure. Because closure isn't given in those situations, it's created. And you won't get it from them, but you can build it within yourself, which means, accepting that the story ended the way that they chose, not the way you deserved. Let the unanswered questions stay unanswered. You interpret the ending, which you experienced, as the clarity that you need. Kind of reclaiming your way from confusion. And just acknowledge that you don't heal when they explain. You heal when you stop needing their explanation.